Hi everybody, welcome back to part 4 of the Bloody Chamber. Just going to try to finish up this video series. Starting this one by talking about the piano tuner. So the piano tuner is a really important addition to the story. He's pretty much the polar opposite of the Bluebeard character, the Marquise. Um, he's gentle, he's kind, he pays attention to the wife, and he's blind. Um, I guess it's not a big spoiler alert to say that like part of the power that the Bluebeard character in this story wields is through vision. You know, he's always looking at the girl. He's always kind of watching her through this kind of surveillance in the castle. He kind of knows her every move. The piano tuner can't do any of that, and so he doesn't wield power in that same way. That's the piano tuner, and so he plays a larger role later in the story. Just continuing to scroll through the story here. Before things kind of turn and the wife goes to check out the bloody chamber, she telephones her mother. I read over here. This is kind of an important when she calls her mother. Like, why does she burst into tears? It's not about the bath taps. Is there perhaps some distance between how the bride tells the story this whole time and how she really feels? Also, this moment sets into motion the mother's ride later. It could probably be said that the mother displays a positive traditional gender trait, intuition. You've probably all heard of that idea of mother's intuition. One of the ways that I think the Bluebeard story is interesting is they're all about, women paying for their curiosity about their husbands slash disobeying their husbands. It's interesting that in every version of this story, there's a pretty good reason for them to do so. That the husband is hiding something, indeed. Just continuing on here, scrolling through the story. Um, so after the Marquise leaves to go to his business deal or whatever in America, he's supposedly going to be gone for 6 weeks. The wife starts going through his things, trying to find out who he really is. So she finds some stuff in a desk, and this leads her eventually, eventually to go to the bloody chamber. So here is an interesting line to me. As she, we had that moment in the library where she was looking at the pornography. We have this moment where she finds kind of the hidden letters in the desk. She writes here, nothing in my life of family love and music had prepared me for these grown up games. So she admits her inexperience. This is another theme that's kind of coming up through the story. Continuing on, um, she makes her way down the stairs. Her curiosity gets the better of her, and she enters the bloody chamber. And this is where she truly learns of her husband's inner world. Her previous wives are down there, quite literally made into objects. We have the opera singer who's been embalmed, the other one whose only the skull remains, the one who modeled for the painting, and then we have the final one inside the Iron Maiden. So remember, I think I said in a different podcast or screencast or whatever elsewhere that murder is the most objectifying thing that you can do to a person. You, you. It's kind of a strange perspective, but to be able to kill someone or something, you have to treat it only as an object. You have to not care about its individuality, and so that's exactly what Bluebeard does here. Is he treats these women like such an object, and then makes trophies out of them. So he completely takes away their humanity, and they only become objects for him. So this is what the wife stumbles into. Horrifying scene. Continuing. The piano tuner shows up when she thinks it's going to be Bluebeard, and the piano tuner um, becomes her confidant. She tells the story to the piano tuner, and he wants to help, even though he can't do very much. Um, and then let's see. I know I'm going fast, but you guys know the end of the story. The story kind of begins to tumble along here. Um, the key, the blood won't wash off the key. That's another note from the original story. Um, Very interesting note here. The bride begins to realize that she's been manipulated, and that probably all the other wives had been manipulated as well. That the whole point of Bluebeard was to test wives in a way that he knew they would fail. And I think there's potentially some interesting analysis there. Um, I guess we have to ask, you know, is this custom of um, women supposedly needing to obey their husbands without question, or face the punishment, is that custom like realistic or fair or equitable, or anything like that? Um, so Bluebeard continues to do these tests, it seems like, and the young bride here is only the latest one to fail. So she wrote, she says, or thinks to herself here, I knew I had behaved exactly according to his desires. Had he not bought me so that I should do so? And again, she realizes she's been manipulated, treated like a specimen or a rat placed in a maze with only one exit. So she starts to realize that she kind of gave away her own free will, to do these things. But again, don't forget that question. Like, was she wrong to do these things? Was she wrong to question him? And then a follow up question: is his punishment, his absolute punishment, fair? I'm sure the answer to that is no. All right, continuing. So then there's the whole ritual. She's got to get herself ready to be executed. Apparently, she's going to be beheaded, and uh, the fact that she's going to be beheaded calls to mind the ruby choker that she wore. So at one point during all of this note that I made, um, Bluebeard presses the key with with the stain on it to her forehead, and it leaves a mark on her forehead. In fact, it's in the shape of a heart. And so the bride writes here, thinks to herself, I saw the heart-shaped stain and had transferred itself onto my forehead, onto the space between the eyebrows, like the cast mark of a Brahmin woman. So this is an interesting addition to the story here. The bride is marked by the bloody key, similar to the A in the scarlet letter or some other kind of brand. It's this visible mark that she gets. An interesting question for you to ask yourself is, like, what does this mark signify? What does this mark signify, and does she deserve it, or to what extent is that mark kind of fair? And then this goes back to the question that I brought up in other parts of this. Does she deserve any blame in this? So continuing, going through. So she's talking with the piano tuner here. She's trying to think of a way to save herself. Going back to the idea of blame that I just mentioned, she asks herself, the piano tuner says, you do not deserve this. And she says, who can say what I deserve or no? She says, I've done nothing, but that may be sufficient reason for condemning me. What about this idea that she's done nothing? Has she done anything? Like, is she correct? And then, on an unrelated note, at this point in the story, I think it's here, she starts referring to the piano tuner as her lover. And this is interesting. We know at the end of the story that they get together, but it's interesting that in her account, it switches right here. Um, they haven't done anything yet. They're not technically lovers yet, but it's funny how she kind of uses the language of an affair, um, with because she's still married at this point with the piano tuner. So I'm not sure what that means, but something for you to think about. And then her mother shows up. Her mother shows up, or let's see, she's about to. Yeah, this. So at this point, this line right here, she sees her mother riding up the causeway. Um, Down here, Bluebeard is pretty vicious. The piano tuner shows up with her, uh, and uses some pretty crude language to insult the bride. Um, that's just an interesting moment. Continuing. All right, so the mother saves the day, shoots Bluebeard. The castle becomes a school for the blind. That's an interesting thing to analyze. Why a school for the blind? Um, to me, it again adds weight to the idea here that vision has power, both through the power of seeing beauty or being beautiful, as well as that appearances can be deceiving. If you write about such a thing, make sure you're not just proving the story is all about don't judge a book by its cover. We're looking for something more than that. Another interesting line from the end of the story here is the wife, is thinking about how her mother knew and why her mother showed up. And she says, I can only bless the, what shall I call it? The maternal telepathy that sent my mother running headlong from the telephone to the station. That maternal telepathy, I think, is another way of saying women's intuition or mother's intuition. And again, it's interesting to note that curiosity and intuition are two sides of the same coin. One is often regarded as negative, the other as a kind of mystical, sacred power. So that might figure into your essay somehow. And then finally, we have the final lines of the story, which reference the mark on her forehead, which she still has, which her husband can't see because he's blind, nor can all the students at the school for the blind. But she thinks to herself here, no paint nor powder, no matter how thick or white, can mask that red mark on my forehead. I am glad he cannot see it, he being the husband, the piano tuner, not for fear of his revulsion, since I know he sees me clearly with his heart, but because it spares my shame. Final line of the story is the word shame. So why does the young wife feel shame at the end of the story? Um, why does she feel it, and is she right to feel it? Is it shame that society is judging her? Is it personal shame? And to what extent is it justified? I think if you can formulate an answer to that, it might help you. It might help you write your paper and come up with an overall interpretation. All right. Well, this concludes almost an hour of videos on this story. I hope they have been helpful, and I will see you on the discussion boards.